Back to the gay marriage vote, and joining me live from Hobart is the former federal Greens leader, Bob Brown. Dr Brown, this vote today was never going to have a different outcome, was it?
Was leadership, and Julia Gillard, Tony Abbott, Malcolm Turnbull, Kevin Rudd, Wayne Swan all failed that leadership test. We're in a nation where the polls show 80% of young people, a majority of Christians, 4 out of 5 Labor voters, a majority of Conservative voters wanted this legislation passed, but that leadership of the nation failed. And the Prime Minister and Leader of the Opposition take that fair on their shoulders. They're responsible for this failure in the Parliament today.
But the House of Representatives voted today. They are the elected representatives of the Australian public. So whatever the polls say on gay marriage, the people who actually represent us voted overwhelmingly against it, 2-1.
Yes, and people will remember that at the elections next year, where it was the Greens who solidly stood up with the majority of Australians to get rid of this discrimination against people in marriage. And, you know, hearts are broken all over Australia today. We just saw a mother lamenting the discrimination which has been delivered by Julia Gillard and Tony Abbott against her child and partner or potential partner today in the Parliament. Look, it's and Labor engineered this. They knew that if the Prime Minister were to go at the last Labor conference for a conscience vote, rather than to take the lead and say, I am leading the country into getting rid of discrimination in marriage, you'd get this result. The Christian lobby might be happy. They don't represent the churches or the majority of Christian voters, but it's a very poor outcome for democracy and that failure of leadership.
Cory Bernardi's remarks today, he does represent the views of some people in the community. Australia is a country that values free speech. Why should he then be censored for sharing that opinion, however offensive and hysterical it may be, as Malcolm Turnbull put it?
Why should offensive statements be rewarded, Lee? But Cory Bernardi's a sideshow to this. The real show is Tony Abbott. If he wanted to show leadership and decency, he would have been supporting this legislation, and he could have stolen a march on Julia Gillard, who stolidly stayed against it, and both of them acting against the majority of people who vote for their parties. It's a pretty poor outcome, and no doubt the legislation will pass further down the line, but the country's been held back, and thousands of people are being discriminated against because of that failure of leadership. And the Greens will go to the next election, I have no doubt. I've been talking with Christine Milne and Sarah Hanson-Young and Adam Bandt about this. We'll go to the next election championing bringing forward that date. But it depends on the voters now, because if they vote for Labor at the next election, if they vote for the coalition at the next election, they're voting again for this discriminatory attitude that we saw in the Parliament today to continue.
Many people who back traditional marriage and oppose gay marriage would not consider themselves to be homophobic. They would consider themselves to be traditionalists. What do you say to that?
Well, it's bigotry. It's saying that if you happen to be gay in this community, you don't deserve to have your love for a partner recognised. And it's very curious, because we know that in communities where you celebrate the love of people for each other, you get greater stability. You get a higher level of happiness, and of course you get better outcomes for everybody. But it's, you know, you can get married if you're to your same-sex partner in Buenos Aires or Mexico City or Washington DC or Reykjavik, but you can't get married here. And that's the decision by Julia Gillard. She will discriminate. That's the decision by Tony Abbott. He is a discriminator. And it's a pretty poor outcome for a country which has led the world in so many other ways in advancing the social reform and democratic reform in the last century or two. These people have let this nation do.
Dr Brown, thank you very much for making time to speak to us tonight from Hobart.
It's a pleasure. Thank you, Lee.